Professor Oda to deliver his welcome speech.
Lumbini Buddhist University and Lumbini Research Center for Understanding and Peace. I am pleased to welcome you all to this gathering of personalities who are assembled here to listen to a presentation on Buddhist economics.
Now, thanking Professor Oda, I would like to request Venerable Professor Narisman Bhadracharya for addressing this assembly.
Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namaha Sanghaya. Good morning, everybody. Today we are gathering here to listen special talk on Buddhist economics. It's my pleasure to be here. So please permit me to say and welcome you, all of you here. So professor from different universities, other Lumbini Buddhist University. I would like to welcome you all.
Thank you, sir. Now it's about time that the main event of today, talk program by Professor Wolfgang Drechsler, is about to begin. So Professor Drechsler, currently at Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore, is a professor at Ragnar Naske Department of Innovation and Governance at Tallinn University of Technology, Estonia. Besides his academic excellence, where he received the Best PhD Advisor Award 3 years in a row, he has also been pretty active in public service. Now in civil service, besides being advisor to the President of Estonia, he also worked for German reunification as Executive Secretary. So he is, in other words, an academician as well as a practitioner who has, I think, taken to his heart university in Estonia of that innovation. And I think a part of innovation is coming out with Buddhist economics, which is not everywhere to be found. So with those words, I would like to request Professor Drechsler to come and give his presentation. Thank you.
To try to bring together and map out how the situation of Buddhist economics is today, and conferences and publications exactly in that. Buddhist economics after the global financial crisis was the name of a big conference at the World Buddhist University in Bangkok, for instance. A general positive prejudice towards Buddhism. And that is why you are more willing to listen to alternatives in the Buddhist concept. Now I mean that not as an inner Buddhist, but as a really out Buddhist point. And so the interest in what these Buddhist economics are has become very strong since this time. There are so different aspects of Buddhist economics that it really depends whom you ask what kind of definition you get. Of course, if you check Wikipedia or an encyclopedia, you will get an answer, but usually one answer, and there are actually many. This is one of my points today when I talk about the reality and the diversity of Buddhist economics. So there are various things that are meant by that, and they are real because they're also practiced. Very important part of Buddhist economics is economics practiced by Buddhists in Buddhist countries and with a Buddhist background. So you have Buddhism as Buddhism, Buddhism as practiced, and then you have a third part. Now what could this third part be? The third part is actually Western Buddhism. And this is Buddhism as practiced in America and other Western countries and by Western thinkers, intellectuals, spiritually minded people. And the contents of Buddhism as practiced in Colorado or in Shropshire or in Frankfurt is actually very different. Very often it comes from a preconceived notion of what kind of life I want, and then it seems that Buddhism fits to that, and I make that fitting to what I already want to accomplish, which in the West very often is different. And of course, all these streams, and these are not all these streams interact with each other. So there are no pure delineations between what I just said, but in principle I think this is a very important thing. And let me say right here that my view is a view, one that I have adapted, that is called Sedesian totality. Georges Sedès, this is the gentleman, institute, the main academic institute of the French colonial power in Indochina to study Buddhism and Buddhist history, the Borobudur and Angkor Wat and so on and so on. Very educated person, Westerner. All of this is Buddhism. If you say it's Buddhism, if you're a part of this, whether it's text-based, whether it's practiced, whether it's more animist, whether it's street level, whether it's diplomats, whether it's university professors, all of them converge into one big phenomenon that we can legitimately call Buddhism. And what I like about that definition is it gives me the space. I don't need to discriminate. I don't need to judge people, which I shouldn't do anyway, at least of all from a Buddhist perspective. Running around judging people and saying, you're a wrong Buddhist, there is already something wrong here, isn't there? But in an applied field like economics, we can really, first of all, welcome everybody to the fold. So, if this is the case, oh, and there is a limit to that though. This picture, this is a Grand Inquisitor. It illustrates a famous story by Dostoevsky. It's a Christian story where the story is that Christ comes back and the head of the Inquisition of the Catholic Church condemns him to be burned to death because he might be the founder of the religion, but he doesn't understand at all what the church is about. With which, what this is the metaphor for is, if we would find some principle of Buddhist economics, but we would for ourselves say the Lord Buddha would completely disagree with that, then it's probably wrong, even if it's practiced. So there needs to be some last connection between what is called Buddhism and what the Buddha taught. If we completely dissociate that, it becomes nonsense. Now, favorite example is, this is a famous mosque in Albania. It's a main Ottoman mosque. And if you look at it carefully, upstairs you have the prayer room and downstairs you have a bar. Many Muslims would say, how can you square drinking and Islam? And the people there say, well, we can. Maybe you scholars can't, but we can. So, this is the practice as compared to the theory. In Buddhism, this focus on practice is often said to be important because Buddhism is probably, careful here, but probably the world religion in which more people who have a devotion towards the Buddha are actually not Buddhists. Devotion to the Buddha, you have, for instance, in traditional Chinese religion. In almost all of these traditional Chinese religion temples, you will find a Buddha statue. And these are people who do focus on the Buddha, but they do not see themselves as Buddhists. And according to the last statistics, we say that about 500 million people belong to traditional Chinese religion. 500 million people, it's a lot of people. You need to get a lot of Buddhist countries to get to this level. So this is why practiced rather than in theory is so important. Now, Buddhist economics, it was in your write-up, you mentioned that Buddhist economics actually does not come from Buddhism or Buddhist countries. And this is important. The first writing of Buddhist economics is by a German-British scholar by the name of F.E. Schumacher. That's the German pronunciation. Schumacher or Macher or something is what the English call it, because they can't pronounce Schumacher. That's a very harsh word if you don't speak German. And he wrote a book, actually originally in the very, very late 50s, then on in the 60s, and so on and so on. The most famous edition is from 1972, I think. And that is called Small is Beautiful. Most people, when you talk to them, associate with Buddhist economics. Small scale, ecological farming, no running after wealth, modesty, even a form of asceticism. Things pull you down, says the Buddha. Material goods are not good for you. Spiritual achievement is what really matters. Get out of this economics. The run after the gold leads to disaster. Again, with a heavy emphasis, that's important, on ecology, sustainability, small community, hand weaving, village cooperatives, and so on and so on. Now, in this book, Schumacher has a small chapter called Buddhist Economics, and it is this chapter that has really started the entire discourse that we have now. Of course, people talked about Buddhist economics before. Of course, there were Buddhist countries where this was talked about before, but it entered the global discourse is with this word. Schumacher is not a Buddhist. Schumacher didn't have any background in the Bible. Schumacher had a very, in spite of his importance, he had a very, how shall I say, popular understanding of what the Buddha taught. That means he had never studied that, but he basically had the general image that Westerners have of what Buddhism means. But on the other hand, if you think about it, that is of course exactly the theory that many Western intellectuals just love, and politicians, small scale, farming, anti-capitalist. It's just beautiful. It's exactly what you want to hear. And then you get it justified through Buddhism. So this is what this book does. It doesn't actually start with Buddhism, but it brings this in. And it emphasizes different things. Now, of course, after Schumacher, Buddhist economics came to Asia, was taken up, and developed in certain ways. Actually, interestingly enough, Schumacher's bases his economics not on any theory, but on the practiced economics that were called Buddhist of Unu in the Myanmar reforms in the 50s. This is, so there were specific reforms by a Buddhist developmental, friendly authoritarian regime that he thought was a really good idea, and he called Buddhist economics what was practiced in Myanmar. That comes later. Yeah? And I think this is very important. And here we have exactly the key point. What Schumacher does, I heard there are several economists here. Mainstream economists don't deal with Buddhist economics at all. Heterodox economists do, policy people, development people, and Buddhism scholars deal with that. From the beginning on, from Schumacher on and during the discourse, Buddhist economics have also had the claim to correct the paradigm of modern mainstream or standard textbook economics. The entire idea of, as we heard, quantification, measuring, modeling, and all based on a homo economicus, that means of the assumed person who maximizes their profits. That's what we are in life for. This is what modern economics is based on. Buddhism says, no, it's not. That's not what matters. In this point. So it is also a corrective to mainstream economics as understood, plus of course that quantitative mathematical modeling, so the discourse goes in Buddhist economics, automatically leads to irreality, whereas Buddhism is always about reality. About Buddhist economics is how important is material gains in Buddhism. Is Buddhist economics about a form of economics amongst people for whom economic success is not the number one priority, but spiritual success is? If this is so, then economics enters a totally different sphere. And it tells to people, you're probably doing already very well. Westerners who become Buddhists usually are from the upper middle class or something like that. And they, as for instance the leading Thai Buddhist economist, Tavivat Privat, explains, Westerners don't have problems with the body. That's actually probably too much already. They have spiritual problems, and that is why they go for Buddhist economics, for relieving their spiritual needs. The problem is, if you bring that to a developing Buddhist country in Southeast Asia, and to tell to the people, yeah, it doesn't matter that you don't have clean water, you should just pray more. That might not be A, very nice, and B, it might not be very Buddhist. So here we have exactly this collision. And this is an important one, and to discuss this is important. We heard a little bit about engaged Buddhists. So the socially engaged Buddhism that tries to have the social change first is actually not the dominating part of Western Buddhism that deals with Buddhist economics. It's very important in Asia, but it's not the dominating part. I don't think there's any place left in the world where people don't want a new iPhone. Anywhere. If you tell them, but you shouldn't want one, they say, yeah, who are you to tell me what I should want? But that is actually the answer here. Is happiness about getting what you want? Is it about what makes you really happy? Or is it to tell people what you want is not what you should want? And the most interesting and most large-scale practical manifestations of Buddhist economics are the last ones. The real fundamental alternative to mainstream economics and Buddhist economics are those Buddhist economic systems that tell to the people, not that this makes you happy, but we will tell you how to be happy. You need a material basis, but from that basis on, please focus on what really matters, and it is not consumer goods. Who can, in today's democratized world, tell to people what they should want? That's a big job. Who can go in front of the people and say, you want that, but you shouldn't, it's not good for you. Okay, your grandmother can do that, but I mean, generally, everybody. Here we have, from an economic perspective, that brings us into our empirical part, a figure, a traditional figure of an institution that tells the people, you get your basics, but I will also tell you how you get closer to true happiness. And that is one of the aspects of the classic Buddhist king, namely, as it is called because it comes in the discourse now from the Theravada tradition, the Dhammaraja. That means a king with such a high level of legitimacy that he can tell the citizens, you're wrong. You should not want that. I tell you what you want because that is what you should want on the way to enlightenment. I hope some of you are now like, what are we talking about? 21st century and Dhammarajas? The point is not to advertise monarchy here. The point is to say that what is unique about genuine Dhammarajas is the personal and institutional legitimacy in the ordering of the state, and therefore the economy as an economic system to tell people where they should be going. The Dhammaraja is not creating the Dharma, but creating a system in which the attainment of which is possible or easier possible. This is the point here. Jayavarman VII of the Khmer Empire, of course, the most famous case for that, the patron saint of Cambodia, if you will, who also did that. That means basic medical care, basic water supplies, and then, via the meditation part, he looks that way. The idea of steering the state in making the attainment of the Dharma possible. Do we have, if we want to be empirical, do we have any Dhammarajas left today? Well, we have some. And that is what we want to look at for the rest of my little talk. The king of Cambodia identifies as a Dhammaraja himself. You know that his influence on the Cambodian economy is extremely minor. That means he doesn't have any. He is an important person. I think he certainly means the role of the Dhammaraja for himself, but he doesn't have not an influence on economic policy making in the kingdom of Cambodia. We do have three countries in which we have a king who operates on these grounds and who coined specific Buddhist development economics. This is what makes it interesting. It's not coincidental that alternative Buddhist development economics along the lines that I've just explained are specifically phrased by Buddhist kings that we still have, Buddhist kings that have a certain influence on their nation's politics. So let's look at what they're actually doing. The three places in which you have Buddhist economics practiced as an explicit national policy as an alternative is first Thailand under King Bhumibol, the so-called sufficiency economics. Second, everybody knows that, the by far most fashionable and important one is of course the fourth king of Bhutan's gross national happiness, which is typical, this is nothing but a Buddhist economics principle. And the third one is counterintuitive to many, and that is the Sri Sultan of Yogyakarta in Indonesia, Hamengkubuwono X. And it's called unification of king and people. And you will say, Sultan? How can you have a Buddhist Sultan? I'll explain. 3 kings, 3 countries, with Dhamarajas, 3 times in our time modern Buddhist economics that claim we will make the people happy, sufficiency economy, very much along the lines of Schumacher, even with an Indian influence from Gandhi and so on. It's this idea, and it was supposed to be an autonomous economy, go about the global economy, but allows the country, Thailand is well, big enough for that, to develop as much as possible, sufficiently for itself. Clearly based on that, King Bhumibol had a very acute sense of being a Dhamaraja. He was absolutely understanding, he was defining himself like that. This is very clear from all talks and so on and so on. The idea of changing the Thai economy towards Buddhist economics, which he already started to have in the 70s, it really came out then in the 90s, did not hit Thai politics. So actually, sufficiency economy got kind of focused, to put it friendlily, on the rural, on the small, on the sustainable. And this is where it worked, you know, village cooperatives, new planting measures, things like that. So what was actually meant as a large-scale Buddhist revision of Thai economy very quickly got into this. And the Thai professional economists said, no, this is not a form of economics. We call it not sufficiency economy, but sufficiency economy philosophy. This is much less dangerous. And we use Buddhist add-ons in normal economics. We color mainstream economics with some Buddhist goals, which is not that bad. Yeah? Now, the king kept promoting sufficiency economy for all his life, but then he became very sick, and last year he died. And so we don't know what is actually up with that. What we can say is that sufficiency economics did not change Thai economics. It added certain points in certain areas, but it was not a revamp at all. Similar time, mid-70s, the idea of a powerful king who defines himself as a Dhamaraja, the 4th king, entering very early on the throne, because his father died very soon, and who creates in a discourse with actually the Western press and Western policy makers who tell him that Bhutan is not good enough by UN and World Bank statistics, and so that he would say, yeah, but that's not the problem of Bhutan, it's your problem because you want these statistics, and the statistics measure the wrong stuff, because gross national happiness is more important than gross national product. It is non-quantitative in the beginning, it is non-modeling, it is completely anti-standard textbook economics. This is very clear from the early parts. Now, gross national happiness, G&H, this is a cottage industry. This has been of great fascination. It's a huge public relations success, to the point that in many mainstream media you will read today about Bhutan being the most happy country in the world, whereas the king's idea was it should become that. He never claimed everybody was really happy in Bhutan. If you talk to the people in Bhutan, they will not necessarily say that they live in paradise. This is a program that has often been criticized as being more for abroad than internal. By the way, one of the fascinating debates has been here that what does gross national happiness actually mean in Bhutanese? That means in Dzongkha, because it's an English word. Actually, it started as an English word. The king thought about the English term first and then translated it into the local language. Well, you can see this. Why this is interesting is a colleague of mine said he asked one Bhutanese farmer, what is this gross national happiness? And he used the Dzongkha term. He said, I have never met here, but she must be a very, very beautiful girl. So she didn't understand it was a principle, but yeah. And that, just a small footnote here on spiritual Buddhism, the shape of the gross national happiness that is supposed to truly make you happy, not take you too serious, stop you from worrying, living well but not too well. Doesn't that sound like an emanation of the Green Tara? Anyway, this is I don't talk to economists about emanations of the Green Tara as the basis of economic relations. But if not, I think it's a great role. During the genesis of the gross national happiness, what happened in Bhutan is that it actually got more mainstream, more global, and more quantified. All these friendly people from UNDP, World Bank, Harvard, and so on said, oh, this is really beautiful, but if we can't measure it, it doesn't exist. You have to measure it. And while the fourth king wouldn't have been so in favor of this modeling, today, gross national happiness is famous for having put happiness into a one indicator equation. So you have 0.5679 means you're a happy thing in Bhutan. So all of these things are true. What happiness is then, if Bhutan has changed that much, meant with gross national happiness? What is the happiness in G&H? Is it still the Buddhist happiness we were talking about the path towards enlightenment? Well, the main administrator of Bhutanese G&H says it's somewhere half between personal happiness and Buddhist happiness. I'm not 100% sure what half between Buddhist and personal happiness means, but that's what he says. So, Bhutanese economy, Bhutanese happiness, all of this have also become much more mainstream. And the third one now is the Sultan of Yogyakarta. Now, how can I even list it as a place? Because if he's a sultan, he's a Muslim ruler, and he is. But Yogyakarta, which is the central part of Java Island within Indonesia, the cultural capital of Indonesia, the fourth largest country in the world. This is a democracy, but within the democracy they have a monarchy. The sultan, the hereditary sultan, is automatically and with no election the governor of that state. A person with an extremely high legitimacy, also spiritual legitimacy. Many people will accept if the sultan, institutionally and as a person, tells you, oh, you shouldn't do that. He's one of the few people that I've seen who can tell to their subjects, you're not being nice. You're not being nice. Think about what you're doing. And then the people say, okay, you're right. Buddhist? Well, Java Island, of course, in his area is the Borobudur, is one of the great classic Buddhist civilizations, and while he, to a certain extent, is not Buddhist, this culture in Java is a classic Hindu-Buddhist kingship. He is a direct follower of the old Hindu concept of the Dhammaraja. He meditates, he has these reflections, he does all of these things that you would expect from that, and so it's an amalgamation. His theory of economic development is a clear mixture. So he has all these figures, as governor, as sultan, as anything, as Dhammaraja. What makes his special economic theory, unification of king and people, special is that it's also newer than the other two. It is very much focused on very contemporary economic and technical development. He bridges both. That means he says, we need the happiness, you really need to be happy, you cannot just be outvoted, I need to take care of all of my citizens. And then comes the but, But for that, today, we do need modern economics, developments, technology, and so on. He is, of all of these people, the one who promotes e-governance, technological development, hacker spaces, startups, and so on, very, very strongly. And it sounds strange, a Dhamaraja who can levitate and also promotes hacker spaces, but that's what he does. So he brings the two things together. Yeah? And this is what's specific here. He never started in an alternative way, but he says we want to be happy, but for the happiness, the modern economics may cost, but they're also necessary for social achievement, for, as I said, water and health and everything like that. So, if we look at these three possible cases for Dhamaraja-based Buddhist economics, what we find is actually very much mainstream and very much input rather than change in reality. The claim might have to be changed, but what we find is different. King of Bhutan, the current one, is interested in this stuff, but not as much as his father was. I think that's legitimate. And the Sultan of Jakarta has only daughters. That's a problem if you're in an Islamic environment. The last Islamic queen died in 1928. We haven't seen anything like that since then. So, what the future of all of this is, we don't know, but if anything, we thought it was going up, and institutionally it seems to actually get less. Not as a reflection within Western economics, but as an alternative to it. Yeah? This is what I mean here. To sum up, Buddhist economics is, as most religion-based economics, not only an extrapolation from respective religious texts, but also, if not primarily, how it has been practiced in reality over time. This is one of these ways. The second one, Buddhist economics is used today as a concept stemming originally from an outside understanding, maybe even misunderstanding, which riveted back to Asia, that is, entails perspectives that profoundly Buddhism-based Buddhist economics might not have. So, what I would say is not, some people say Schumacher is just wrong with his Buddhist economics because he's not Pali Canon based. What I would say is he adds to economics from this perspective, but you need to have all of them together. And then finally, actually forms its own paradigm of economics as it is necessarily realistic, but it is more real as an add-on than a utopia. To say that again, we do not have a case today of independent Buddhist economics anywhere. What we do have is standard economics with Buddhist elements added and to many extents. And the tension will never give. The tension between those in Buddhist economics who say that spirituality is all you need and those who say that don't talk to people about spirituality before development. So, while on the one hand, this idea that you tell people don't maximize your economic interests because it doesn't lead to higher happiness entails a problem, it also entails an answer. And this is something that to reflect on and discuss, I think, is primarily up to Buddhist studies, Buddhist reflections, the Sangha, and Buddhist scholarship in places like Lumbini Buddhist University. How to deal with these things in Buddhist economics is not something for which we have an answer, but where the discussion is just starting. That you enter via Buddhism that question of what makes us really happy and what are economics really for. I think that's a great question, and no matter what the answer is, it's a great question to ask. And I personally believe that the Buddha's teaching do give us the most promising way. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Drechsler. You have loaded us with many things today.
This type of the program is important to make people aware about the economic aspect in Buddhism. And it certainly would make people that the teachings of Buddha are not only limited to the spiritual aspect.
Now I'd like to request Professor Dr. Madan Dahal. He's an economist, so he's taking it from his economic point of view.
I'm extremely delighted to have this opportunity to provide my comments and observation on the paper entitled The Reality and Diversity of Buddhist Economics, presented by Professor Wolfgang Drechsler. Deficiencies of Global Economic Meltdown that occurred in 2008 and suggested for the induction of Buddhist economics as an alternative to both neoliberal economic policy and standard textbook economics. This is the very appropriate terminology he has mentioned.
Now, I would like to request Professor Triratnamananda.
Now, I agree with him that the financial crisis some decades before led the government or state or the people to find some alternative options on different aspects of the state economy and other aspects of economy. And the Buddhist economy attracted many audience or many scholars to find a kind of alternative option to the economic crisis the countries are facing.
Now, back to Professor Drechsler.
Okay, so thank you so much for your feedback. Talking back to the postmodern and pseudo-Western debate, that to historicize historicism, today we say, oh, let the driver pay for the road, is exactly correct. And I do think there is a lot of potential because it answers exactly with its strong emphasis on reflection 4 times that are very cerebral. And this goes back to one of the questions from the back, how do I have an incentive in life via Buddhism? One of the answers is that it is fair to say, I think, but of all the great world religions, to me, Buddhism seems to be the most self-reflective. The one that tells you the most to focus on who I am, what I really want, what my real priorities are. Then, of course, the connection is also clear. But this is the thing. Anything that is not about receiving only from the outside, but reflecting inside of who I am, that is an objective achievement, I think, of Buddhism here. Again, happiness is its own research field. There are people who only deal with that. What really makes you happy? There is various views on that. It depends on your philosophical background. It depends on your scientific background. The problem is that many of our systems assume that people knows what makes them happy. Again, the question is whether you want to differentiate it or whether you want to say there is a beautiful synergy and that actually some parts of the sustainability approach to Gandhism doesn't pair very well with the sufficiency economy part of Buddhist economics. So I would also, I guess this was also your point, say that this can be fruitfully seen together, and it of course diffuses the, if you will, uni-religious part of the entire point. So thank you very much again for your comments.
Thank you, Professor Drechsler. Now,